In the early spring of 2023, a couple from Wiltshire, England, Mark and Aileen Delaney, purchased a Georgian-style home in East Runton, a quiet village on the Norfolk coast. The property, known among locals as Woodfield Grange, had once belonged to the late Sir John Hurt, the renowned British actor. It stood proudly on the edge of the woods, its brick facade faded from sea air, its chimneys still whispering the scent of old smoke. The house had been on the market for years since Hurt's death in 2017, with a few half-hearted buyers backing out during the conveyancing stage. The estate agent said it was simply bad timing, but the villagers said otherwise. Quietly, they warned the Delaneys to steer clear of the old man's echo. Neither Mark nor Aileen paid it much attention. They chalked it up to rural superstition. Mark, a retired university lecturer in English literature, saw the move as a chance to finally write his novel. Aileen, once a costume designer for local theater, was ready for a slower life by the sea. The home still had many of Hurt's original features: wood-paneled walls, aged chandeliers, and a small writing room where the actor had kept scripts and letters. Felt like stepping into the past. But by the second week, the house didn't feel quite theirs. It started subtly. Aileen began to notice faint whispering in the study only when she was alone, and only in the late afternoon. She assumed it was the wind pushing through the chimney or echoes from the woods. But one day, as she arranged books on the shelf, she heard it clearly. "Not that line, it's wrong." She froze. The voice was low, gravelly, with a refined diction. She turned. No one there. The door was closed. Mark was in the garden. When she told him, he laughed and blamed it on stress. But the voice returned. Sometimes it muttered about scenes and characters. Once it angrily hissed, "You butchered it." Mark thought she was being fanciful. That changed one evening when he stayed in the study to write. Around midnight, he heard the slow creak of the floor behind him, distinct, deliberate. Thinking Aileen had come in, he turned to speak, but no one was there. The next morning, he asked, "Did you come in last night?" "No," she said. "I thought you were in bed." Neither of them slept well after that. The long upstairs corridor, which once led to John Hurt's private quarters, had a peculiar habit. The lights would flicker, always the same two sconces at exactly 2:42 a.m. Mark, frustrated, rewired them, hired an electrician, even replaced the bulbs. Still, every night the flicker returned. No storm, no wind. One night, fed up, Mark waited in the hall with a camera. 2:42, the lights dimmed. Through the camera's lens, he caught something just for a moment. A silhouette, standing at the far end of the hallway. Not moving, just watching. He dropped the camera. When he looked again, it was gone. But when he played the video back, the recording froze at that exact frame. The silhouette remained on screen. The camera died shortly after, completely inoperable. He deleted the footage. Aileen discovered it by accident. While cleaning the library, she leaned on a warped shelf, and it shifted inward. A latch clicked. A hidden door. Behind it, a narrow stairway leading down to what looked like a converted dressing room. Dusty clothes on a rack. A cracked mirror. An old photograph of John Hurt during rehearsals. And on a small table, a leather-bound journal. No dust on it. As if someone had just been writing. She opened it. The pages were filled with dialogue, most of it crossed out violently. Scribbles. Rants about being forgotten. They only remember the pain. They took the man and left the shell. Not finished. Not finished. That night, Aileen dreamed of him. He was standing in the woods behind the house, reciting a monologue from The Elephant Man. But the words dissolved into groans. She woke to the sound of sobbing outside their bedroom door. Mark didn't hear it. In October of 2023, the Delaneys moved out. They didn't sell the house. They just left. The story they gave friends was about Aileen's health, saying the sea air had worsened her asthma. But those close to them knew something else had happened. Aileen stopped designing. Mark abandoned his manuscript. They now live in a small cottage inland, away from the coast. The house still stands, empty. Locals say lights come on at odd hours, though the power was shut off. A dog walker claimed to hear a man reciting Shakespeare deep in the woods at dusk. A former caretaker quit after 2 weeks, saying he heard someone scream, "Cut!" in an empty hallway. They say John Hurt left the stage in 2017. But maybe not the house. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. A pale December sun crawled across the Norfolk sky, its light diluted by low-hanging clouds that never quite lifted. Woodfield Grange stood hunched against the winter, its chimneys weeping steam, its high sash windows reflecting nothing but gray. Though empty, the house seemed alert like an old actor backstage, dressed and waiting, listening for his cue. It had been nearly 2 months since the Delaneys left without ceremony. Their possessions were removed swiftly, almost surgically, by a professional clearance crew who refused to enter after dusk. One of the movers, an older man with decades of work under his belt, told the estate agent that something in the house kept whispering, "Do it again." He wouldn't elaborate. The doors were locked, the heating shut off, the lights disconnected from the grid. But still, on some evenings, particularly those soaked in fog, the hallway windows would glow faintly from within. A narrow amber band across the top panes, as though someone inside had lit a lamp and set it on a low table. And the locals, well, they stopped walking their dogs near the property. It was early January when the first signs of intrusion appeared, not by human hands, but time itself. Damp crept into the walls despite the quality of the brick. A silver bloom of mold began threading its way up the baseboards in the old servants' corridor. Wallpaper curled away like dried petals. Yet, curiously, in the old study, John Hurt's favorite room, everything remained untouched. No dust, no warping. Even the air was still scented faintly with pipe tobacco and varnish. The house, it seemed, protected this room. Or perhaps the room protected itself. The caretaker assigned by the property management company, a middle-aged man named Douglas Rain, only visited in daylight and never entered the study. The one time he did, on his second visit, he stood at the doorway for a long moment before muttering "Hell no" under his breath and turning back down the hall. He told the agency he'd do the grounds and the gutters, but the inside was too lived in for a dead man's house. Then, in February, an inquiry came from abroad. A woman from Canada, an arts curator named Evelyn Marchand, had become fascinated with Hurt's life and work, particularly his more obscure theater performances. She was in her 40s, quiet, unmarried, and had spent the last decade restoring historic properties for small art residencies. She didn't flinch when the estate agent told her about the house's history. "I know about the Delaneys," she said on the call, "but I don't scare easily. Artists never do." She arrived under a rain-choked sky, her boots crunching along the pebbled drive, suitcase in one hand, leather folio under the other. She wore a long wool coat and a navy scarf tucked high beneath her chin. The house greeted her with silence, no creaks, no wind in the beams, just that vast, patient hush of a space long inhabited and recently abandoned. Inside, the air was cold but dry. Her footsteps echoed lightly off the flagstone floor in the foyer. A distant sound, not quite dripping, not quite tapping, came from the back staircase, where the servants would have once moved unseen. She didn't turn toward it. Instead, she climbed the main stairs, brushing her hand along the banister polished smooth by generations. She made her bedroom in the corner suite overlooking the woods, choosing the only one that didn't share a wall with the hallway where the lights had always flickered. She left the study alone for now, preferring to explore the rest of the house first cellar to attic. It was during one of these explorations, on her 4th day, that she found the journal the Delaneys had missed. It was not hidden, simply resting inside the built-in wardrobe in what had once been Hurt's dressing room. The same room behind the shifting bookshelf. The same room Aileen had dreamed of. The journal was slender, wrapped in black leather, and the pages smelled faintly of old smoke and ink. The writing was precise, almost theatrical. A looping cursive. Some entries were clear, others frenzied. All were dated between 2015 and 2016, just before his death. "I wake and I'm still here, but the character has left. Who remains? What lines am I supposed to deliver? The audience is gone. Only the stage remains." Another entry, dated just 3 weeks before his final hospital stay. "Something in the walls remembers better than I do. I rehearse in dreams. When I wake, they're still watching. Evelyn read every page, then closed the journal and placed it back exactly where she found it. She did not dream that night, but she woke with the distinct sensation that someone had stood by her bed for a long time. And still the study waited. The next morning, Evelyn made a decision. She would enter the study, not with bravado or fear but with reverence. She boiled water for tea, placed the cup on a saucer, and carried it with her like an offering. The study door creaked open easily. Dust motes shimmered in the light that spilled through the tall windows. The bookshelves stood like sentinels. His old leather chair faced the fireplace, turned away from the desk. She stepped inside and froze. There on the desk was a script, not an old one, fresh paper, a monologue, typed, not handwritten. Its title was simply The Room. No author's name. She reached for it, and from somewhere just behind her, a voice whispered, warm and exact, "Take your time but say it right." Evelyn did not move for a long time. Her hand hovered over the script, fingers curled in hesitation. The voice, unmistakably male, resonant and controlled, had spoken not from a corner or corridor, but from the very space behind her ear, as though the breath of the sentence still lingered on her skin. She turned slowly. The study was empty. The fireplace, long unused, housed only a neat stack of dry wood and gray ash. The shelves were quiet, their rows of leather-bound volumes pressed tightly together like sleeping soldiers. Outside, the bare limbs of the yew trees scraped lightly against the window panes. But inside nothing moved, and yet something in the room felt freshly disturbed, as if a performance had just ended and the actor had quietly stepped into the wings. She turned back to the desk. The script was still there, white paper in a neat stack, aligned to the corner, waiting. Evelyn sat, careful not to slide the chair too far, somehow afraid to scrape the floor, as if loud sounds would offend the room. She lifted the first page. No date, no production, just a heading. The Room. A monologue in 3 voices. She read the first lines aloud, slowly. "There is a chair in the middle of the room. Faces nothing. I sit in it sometimes and pretend I am elsewhere. I speak as if someone is listening. They never are. But I speak anyway." The words were simple, but they vibrated in her chest, as though the air around her thickened with each sentence. As she read, she noticed that her voice, her own voice, had shifted. A subtle cadence had entered, as if something beneath the text guided her rhythm. She paused, throat dry, and then, without warning, the temperature in the room dropped. It was not the soft chill of an English winter, but something heavier, dense, like walking into a mausoleum. She stood, script still in hand, and moved to the fireplace. A thought occurred to her then, irrational but firm. He used to read here, every day, facing the light. She placed the script on the mantel. The hearth below, though cold, gave off a faint scent of smoke. The logs, untouched for years, now bore blackened edges. She had not lit them. That night, Evelyn lay in bed with the bedroom door shut and locked. The journal she'd found earlier now rested beside her pillow, though she hadn't reopened it. Outside, a wind had begun to rise low and constant, pressing against the walls as though the house were a lung slowly inhaling. At 2:42 a.m., her eyes snapped open. No sound, no flash of light, just a sensation immediate and unmistakable that she was not alone. The hallway. She sat up and listened. Silence. Then, faintly, from beyond the closed bedroom door, a slow, deliberate clack, as of wood striking wood. Then another, came in a rhythm 2 seconds apart. A sound familiar but unplaceable. Evelyn rose, barefoot, and crossed to the door. She didn't open it. She simply listened. The sound came again. Clack, clack, then silence. And in that silence, a whisper that chilled her marrow, not loud, not aggressive, but present, as if spoken directly into the shell of her mind. Line, please. In the morning, she found footprints in the upstairs corridor. Bare, damp, as if someone had stepped out of a bath and walked straight down the carpet runner toward the study. No signs of broken locks, no open windows, no one else in the house. She followed them, They ended at the study door. Inside, the chair at the desk had been turned toward the fireplace again. The script was gone, but on the desk was a single sheet of fresh paper. She stepped closer. Typed in the same clean font were only 2 words. Act 2. Nothing more. Later that day, Evelyn left the house for a walk along the clifftop path, cold, salt-soaked air in her lungs, the wind tearing at her coat. The village below sat hushed under gray light, its rooftops damp with sea mist. She passed an elderly man walking a black Labrador. He nodded politely. "You're in Hert's place, aren't you?" he asked. She hesitated. "I suppose I am." He studied her for a moment, then looked out toward the crashing waves. You know, he never stopped working. Not really. Even when he couldn't get out of bed. He'd whisper lines in his sleep. My brother was his night nurse. Said it was like watching someone trapped between scenes. Like he didn't know which life was the real one. Evelyn said nothing. Before she could walk away, he added, "That house never liked being empty. Be careful with the quiet." That evening, she lit a fire in the study. Not out of comfort, but necessity. The house had grown colder, despite the working radiators. The kind of cold that settled not on the skin but in the joints. The fire crackled, and for a while the room seemed to loosen. Shadows danced lightly along the walls. She sat in the leather chair, legs crossed, the journal on her lap. She read for hours. Each entry chipped away at something she hadn't known was inside her. A shared anxiety between artist and witness. A hunger to preserve meaning even as the body failed. Hurt had written not just about roles, but about forgetting, about watching his memories retreat like waves from shore, and the terror of being remembered incorrectly. One page read, "I do not fear death. I fear being reduced to that voice. I was more than it. I am more than it. Let the house speak for me when I cannot." She looked up. The fire had died down. Coals glowed faintly, breathing their last heat into the room. And then from deep inside the chimney a low, deliberate voice echoed. "Say it again." Evelyn did not scream. The voice had been too real for fear to rise, too intimate, too close, as though it came not from the chimney but from within her own ribcage. Her breath caught. Her spine straightened. The last of the fire collapsed in the grate, sending a soft hiss into the silence. And she sat alone again, the glow dying around her like stage lights dimming after a monologue's final line. Stillness returned. The house waited. Evelyn rose. The journal in her hand trembled slightly, but her fingers held it firm. She placed it back in the study drawer, precisely where she'd found it. Not out of superstition but respect. Ritual. The gesture felt right, like a curtain call at the end of a long performance, done not for applause, but closure. She turned, extinguished the last lamp, and left the room. But she didn't sleep. Instead, she wandered the halls long after midnight, listening to the house speak in its own language. The occasional groan of the floorboards as they settled into their century-old bones, the sighing draft beneath the attic door, the strange soft clack once again that came from somewhere near the basement stairs. She didn't follow it. At 4:16 a.m., she sat down at the small kitchen table, beneath the old copper pans still hanging above the hearth. She made tea. Her hands didn't shake. Whatever had lingered in the house, it no longer frightened her. If anything, she felt inducted, invited, as though she now occupied the same role Hurt once had, custodian of a space where stories continued after their endings. That morning a letter arrived. No postage, no address, just a folded envelope slipped through the front door, resting neatly on the welcome mat. Inside was a single page of typed script. The header read, "The Room, Act 3, Final Movement," and beneath only one line, "Exit, pursued by silence." Evelyn did not leave the house. She stopped going to the village, stopped taking her walks, but she was not ill, nor depressed. Neighbors, if asked, would say she simply settled in. Her lights burned later each night, sometimes well into dawn. Music began playing from the windows, old jazz or Chopin or Mahler, depending on the hour. Curtains swayed in open windows, though the breeze was still. A few local children said they'd seen her in the garden, talking to no one. She began writing. Not emails, not essays, but long, sprawling scenes. Dialogue, character notes, blocking instructions, scripts. When the estate agent came by in early April to check on the property, he found the front door ajar. The smell of pipe smoke curled through the hallways. He called out, stepped inside, and found the study occupied. The fire was lit. A chair had been turned toward the hearth. No one was seated there, but on the desk, pages lay neatly stacked, fresh ink still drying. The first page bore the title, The Room, a monologue in 4 voices, by Evelyn Marchand and J. Hurt. The estate agent backed out slowly, shutting the door behind him. He didn't return. Years passed. The house remained off the market. No new listings, no renovations, but the lights still came on at night. Through the upper windows, figures were sometimes seen moving behind the curtains. Not just one, but several shadowed outlines of actors waiting for cues. Local lore grew. Some said Evelyn had disappeared. Others claimed she had become part of the house itself, absorbed into its bones like ivy creeping beneath the floorboards. A visiting theater student swore he'd heard someone rehearsing lines near the hedgerow one night in summer. When he followed the voice, he found no one, but the words stayed with him. I remember everything when I pretend I've forgotten. And of course, there were the tapes. Unlabeled VHS recordings that began showing up in charity shops around Norfolk. Always the same, dim, flickering footage of the study, the fireplace glowing, a woman's voice reading from a script, her tone calm, reverent. On one tape, just before the end, a second voice joins in. Older, British, distinctly theatrical. They never were listening, it says. But you spoke anyway. That was the point. The house still stands. Woodfield Grange. Its roof still holds against the rain. The windows blink against the fog. Inside, the study remains warm. The chair is still turned toward the fire. And on the desk, the script continues to grow page by page, scene by scene. No one sees who writes it, but it's always written in the same hand. And every night, just before midnight, the house inhales. And somewhere, in a room no one enters, a voice says, "Line," and another answers, "You're on." Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.